What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Trail, a college baseball recruiting podcast. My name is Trevor Powers, and I am joined by fellow host of this podcast, Sam Scharf. If you're new to this podcast and this is your first time listening to him, well, first, welcome. We talk about college baseball recruiting process and hopefully give you any advice and some tips as you try to get through the landscape of getting your opportunities to play college baseball. Smash the subscribe on the YouTube channel. Check out our Recruiting 101 portfolio catalog is probably a better term for that, where we answer all the questions that Sam and I have seen a lot over the last couple months to years that we've been in this industry. But Sam, today we're going to talk about the realities of college baseball today. Everybody knows there's been big changes, COVID eligibility years, transfer portal, name, image, and likeness, even to the point of potentially settlement changes, revenue sharing, and all of these things that college athletics is not, as I always like to say, your grandfather's college athletics. Let's start on the transfer portal. How has the transfer portal changed high school recruiting from your perspective as somebody who's been in the industry and seen it on both ends of the spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, across now, 12 plus years, helping high school players through the college baseball recruiting process, the transfer portal, and I would say more specifically, right, the transfer waiver has had the most profound impact on high school recruiting. And I think that's important to distinguish is the concept of transferring between schools has been relevant as long as college athletics has been in place, right? The transfer portal, is a formalized, list or database, right? Where, those student athletes that are looking to change institutions, that list is now populated in one specific area. But really the ability to have a waiver and to be immediately eligible at that next institution, that's really what has caused, this free agency of sorts, in college athletics. And, now, a few years into it, you're starting to see guys, especially in this off season now, end up at schools, 3 and 4. And that was something that, I don't think any of us foresaw, a decade earlier. So, roster management, player movement is at an all-time high, and it just has a huge effect on every aspect of the recruiting process. I would say from a college coaching perspective, like they're spending a lot of time having to re-recruit their own players, right? Whether that's, having to deal with NIL, right, at the highest levels of the sport, right, in the Power Four, and probably most specifically, the SEC and parts of the ACC and some other the bigger programs in the landscape of college baseball, or even, throughout the mid-major and Division II and Division III, right? Like they're trying to get their players to stay home and not look elsewhere. And that's time and energy that they have to devote to that resource. And, then you have, coaches that have to spend, more energy evaluating the portal, right? Like I'll never forget, going back to, last summer in 2023, and I go up to an NECBL game up in Northern Connecticut, and it's a midweek game, and I show up there to watch, a player pitch, and I look around and there's 5 Division I recruiting coordinators there watching this game, right? And trying to lock in on a couple of other guys who are on the field and in the transfer process. So whether that's, the Northwoods or the Cape or some of these places where you have a high population of talent, and, no coincidence that those guys are also in the portal. Like you're seeing coaches in those venues more than you ever have before, whether it's to recruit new talent or babysit their own guys, right? Because they don't want those guys going to some of those, high-end leagues and, have finding success, and all of a sudden they end up in the portal too, So, these are the tentacles of the new reality of college athletics. And, coaches are just spending a ton of time having to constantly, babysit their own rosters, and from there, the high school guys kind of quickly become an afterthought, and there's not a Division I program that doesn't recruit the transfer portal, right, in some entity, right? And guys have different viewpoints on that, right? You have some programs that have made it a priority in terms of, talent procurement. And then you have others that, hey, we're still going to recruit high school guys. They're the foundational element. They've, come in, fit our culture, build player development, but we're going to use the portal to either, add depth where we might have it lacking, or, cover up, the exodus on our own roster because, we need to recruit somebody that's a little bit more seasoned, physically, mentally prepared to come in there and compete right away versus the, 17, 18-year-old high school kid that is going to have that transition, and I think those are the realities of where we're at today, and on the high school side, I think that's why, fit is more important than ever, you know what I mean? And making sure that you're in a place where there's going to be a pathway to the field in your career and that you're not going to constantly be recruited on top of, definitely has to factor in.
Yeah, and so many different avenues that we can take this conversation. I think that's why we wanted to have this conversation on its own, is because it's such an in-depth conversation and there's so many different directions we can talk about it from. So first, because I do want to talk about how this has changed numbers entering freshman classes compared to what they used to be. First, let's talk about it from the college coach perspective, right? And the perspective that you hear a lot of times like that. I was having a conversation with a college coach this weekend, and he just flat out told me, listen, it's really hard for me to convince our head coach to take a high school kid right now, right? Didn't have the best 2024 season. Coach who wants to win, as all coaches do. Not that he feels like he's on the hot seat. He's not at a program that is probably going to fire him for sub 500 seasons, but just somebody who wants to win, wants to build a contender. Felt like they missed on some guys in the high school recruiting process and in the transfer portal and felt like they needed to replenish those things. There's nothing that a high school kid can do to prove that they're going to be a successful college individual, right? And the reason I say individual and not athlete is the boxes kids check in that have gone to college is the ability to respond to the weight room, the ability to go to class, the ability to handle your diet and the things you put in your body the right way and not gain the freshman 15, the ability to stay academically eligible, the ability to be away from home for an extended period of time and not feel the necessity to go home and get homesick, right? So we wonder why college coaches have a tendency to start to trend towards the 20, 21-year-olds. Yes, physical and baseball development is a part of it, but any good coach is going to tell you they'd prefer to have the 18-year-old ball of clay than the 21-year-old already maxed out individual. It's the mental aspect of being a college student as well as an athlete that these guys have proven, and it's just less risk for a similar reward for these coaches that want to build a contender each and every year. So I know there's not really a question in that, but kind of talk about the conversations that you've had surrounding why coaches may prefer that 21, 22-year-old and why it's not always just on-field production.
Yeah, no doubt. I think, mentioned it before, right? Like the college transition is difficult. You're living on your own for the first time. You have to do your own laundry. You have to make your own food. Like these trivial things, aren't so matter of fact as a 17, 18-year-old, right? When you get to campus, and then there's, temptations away from the field with social life and distractions and things that come about in that avenue. So there's just a lot being thrown at these guys that, are, harder to factor in. And let's take it back on the field too. I think the evaluation process of a transfer portal player, it's just easy, right? You're able to look at stats and say, hey, at his previous institution level of play, he was able to do, X, right? In terms of these key statistical, components that we value here at our program. We know that guys at that level previously who transitioned to, our conference or level of play had success. This seems like a profile based on 200 college at-bats that's going to work. Let's invest in that versus, the high school guy where the level of play is, it varies so greatly, right? I was just down in Georgia at WWBA, last week, and, you go game to game and, you see potential high school draft on the mound in one place who's, 90 plus and committed to, an SEC program. You roll over to the next venue, you've got a, upper 80s, touching 90 arm, that really projects. That should be a good Division I arm. And then, next place is a, 78 to 81, left-hander who's flipping his breaking ball at 68 miles an hour. And yeah, maybe he's a smaller Division III recruit, but it's really hard, right, to evaluate a hitter versus those three, different type of guys that you're competing on the mound versus. So, I think when you really start to now look at it just through the scope of the evaluation, we're getting a really good feel for that player across 200 college at-bats and, can have an easier pathway of understanding of how they can fit into our program, right? I think on top of that, then, when you now start to look at, how coaches are thinking inside of this very transient nature of roster construction, and talking with a small Northeast program last week, is like, do we want to go and offer a high school arm and give him a lot of money, right? And he's probably not ready to, produce at, let's say we're going to offer him 60%, right? Like you're probably not getting 60% of value in year one, right? Most guys are not ready to come in and pitch in conference as a freshman, right? And that's kind of what that scholarship allotment would lean towards. And then, in year two, if they do step into that role and do really well, like they're most likely out, you know what I mean? So you just spent, 2 years at a high scholarship allotment for no value, good value. Thanks for being here. I'm on to the next opportunity versus, hey, let's go to the portal. Let's get that same arm, and we probably have him for 2 years, and he's ready to step on campus and fit into that need in terms of high leverage innings from day one. And that's how coaches are thinking, and that's why it affects, all parts of the game. It's just not, the four ACC and SEC teams that ended up in the World Series, right? And obviously, it takes a prominent role there, right? There's a lot of coverage on those guys who, were able to reach the highest level of sport and help teams get to Omaha. But you're seeing it at all reaches of the game, and as a result, whether it's the roster spots or the financial ramifications of it, high school players are definitely at a disadvantage compared to prior years.
Yeah. And I think that is such a big component of it, is the numbers game, right? So I had a conversation when this was 2021, I think, when people were still trying to figure out how many guys do we want to take on each end. Most staffs at the time were a mix of both. I'm sure there's some staffs that are now all transfer. There's some staffs that have been burned by the portal and how they evaluate in there. I found it fascinating when I talked to multiple Division I coaches that were now saying, and I knew how many guys we were recruiting, and it wasn't in the single digits, and they were saying that they were bringing in 3, maybe 5, depending on what they've seen. And I think that the conversations I've had, it's been pretty consistent that that 5 number is the sweet spot of a lot of colleges to take freshmen. And so now you're talking about the numbers game, and we're going to get into another thing that impacts the numbers game of how many kids get on said campus at a certain school. But you take what was 12 down to 5, and imagine every Division I program now taking 5 kids instead of 12. How does that impact everything else when it comes to freshmen enrolling in colleges and going where they at least think they should be fits at?
No doubt, it's a domino effect, right? Because as less opportunity at the highest level of the sport, right? Players get pushed down, and not that I love that phrase, but right, in terms of the hierarchy of the sport, and now you end up with an abundance of talent that's playing at the Division II and the Division III level. I think look at whether it's the PSAC right in Pennsylvania Division II, or the NJAC here in New Jersey at the Division III level. I mean, you show up at these games in conference, like you're going to see talented dudes on the field. It's not a rare occurrence to show up at an NJAC conference game on the weekend and see two 90-mile-an-hour arms opposing each other, right? And that's a function of where we are in terms of player development, and obviously velocity, being at an all-time high at every level of the sport. But it's also a function of how much talent has been matriculated across all different levels because of the portal, and more high school players having to spread out across the different levels because of the effect of the transfer portal. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that, and that's what I always said is, like, even I didn't coach 10, 15 years after I played. I coached Division III baseball 3 years after I played, and ace level arms in Division III baseball when I played 82 to 86. When I coached 90 to 92. And it was the flip of a switch. Like, we are not talking about calendar of years, multiples, and time frame between when I stopped playing and when I was coaching. No, we're talking about 2 to 3 years, and the difference of talent, right? The prioritization of velocity had a piece of that, but like even your bottom of your conference Division III teams would roll out a high 80s arm, and you'd be like, what? Like, yeah, sure, he'd walk the world, but there's the talent, right? The talent is the biggest thing. And like I said, I want to talk about one thing that has created that trickle down effect of all levels, which has made D3 the most talented it's ever been. But let's stick on the transfer portal for one more question here. I'm a prospective athlete, and I work with you, and I pick up the phone and I say, hey, Sam, I really think I'm a high caliber baseball player. I want to go to I watched Alex Madera play in Omaha. I want to go to Division III and transfer to Division I. How do you handle that question? Because there is a give and a take to the transfer portal. And I know every kid that sees those guys, they want to be that guy. But how do you kind of answer that question when a prospective student athlete asks that?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump forward for a second before I answer that question. I think, obviously guys like Alex, and you look at the UConn roster, right? That had a nice postseason run this year, and featured 9 guys who started their career at the Division III level. Like, that gets a lot of fanfare, as it should, right? Like, those guys are tremendous stories, and to see them have success is really cool. But they're part of a very small percentile of guys who have had that opportunity, right? There's a lot of guys who get left in the portal, right, at the end of the transfer cycle, right? I think last year about 1,200 players were left in the transfer portal when the fall semester started. So there's more nightmares than success stories. And I think it's important that we point that out, because it probably doesn't get talked about enough. Everybody loves the success story, and it's really cool. And those guys, like I said, they deserve all the credit for, going to a great program like Arcady and producing at an elite level, and now having a chance to go and play at Carolina and play in Omaha, and, do it at the highest level of sport. But again, those are one-offs, right? Most guys, I think really need to make a great decision in the recruiting process from day one. Be very comfortable where their feet are and where their career is going to begin. Understand that the only way to proceed with an opportunity at the next level is to go there and have a ton of success, right? If you only have one foot in the door and you kind of think this is just a pathway to the next destination, most likely not going to be as successful as you need to be. So I think you need to make a really good decision. You need to always prioritize fit. Is this somewhere where I can have a great 4-year career on the field, earn a degree that's going to set me up for my career path that I want to pursue and allow me to excel as a person. If you do that, look, whether you get that opportunity to, make that jump to a higher level in years ahead, or, end up as a guy who gets to, have a great 3-year career and, 600 to 800 career at bats, like those are both success stories. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you need to go in with that mindset of, hey, this is where I'm going to be for 4 years. I can be successful here. If the dynamic shifts, you then have that conversation. But I think it's, um, obviously, look, it's happening. The portal is here to stay. It's a part of our sport at this point. There will be guys who follow in, an Alex Madera's footsteps and get a chance to go from a great Division III program to an elite Division I level. But I don't think you can ever plan on that being your pathway. I think you need to go in and be present, understand what the ask is of your current institution, your current head coach and program, and play at the highest level that you're capable of doing so there. And again, if opportunities afforded to you in the future, then it's something to think about at that point.
Yeah, that's the exact answer that I was hoping to give you a nice pass for a layup for, because that is a question that I'm sure you probably nip it in the bud a lot quicker than I probably have in the past, as I still develop relationships with people. But it has been something that has come up in conversation, especially because of my intimate relationship with said players and people who have seen that. And it's kind of like more along the lines of like, and I give it from the perspective of, if you want to be that guy, you have to be the hardest working person in the room every time you walk in it 365 days a year and still go out there and perform for 50 plus games a year and be an All-American. And then maybe you'll have an opportunity to. I mean, I saw up close and personal, not only Alex, but Connor Mariniak, who's the reigning Division III National Player of the Year, who's going to be at Charlotte next year for Misericordia. Matthew Lazendorf, who is another arm from Misericordia, who's going to be at Virginia. Paul Tamaro, who was at UConn. And then any other guys, Ben Watson, who was at Elizabethtown. I was able to watch all of those guys play. And let me just tell you one thing. They all had the wow factor the second they did anything. Right. And those are guys that even at small Division III schools stood out like a sore thumb because they did everything at an elite level. Paul Tamaro single-handedly won Oswego Regional against us. Double with the bases loaded, dive and play up the middle with runners in scoring position. That's the type of athlete these guys are. And there's a reason why Paul Tamaro started probably 100-plus games over 2 years at UConn after having an All-American level career at Oswego. It's because he's one of the best 150 to 200 baseball players in college baseball, no matter the level, right? So, Sam, let's direct this conversation into, this might be more pertaining to the higher levels of college baseball, but it does impact the lower levels. One, we've talked about the trickle-down effect of talent, right? And there's several things that go into it. Schools are taking less high school kids, but there's also a thing that people don't realize because it doesn't impact as many people. Most college baseball players realize at some point in time that they're not going to be drafted. But when we took the draft from 40 rounds to 20 rounds, we don't have to check my math on the spot, but roughly 600 kids are now entering college baseball in some form or fashion that would have originally been entering pro ball, or 600 kids are staying in college for an extra year that would have been entering pro ball. And then obviously they're able to stick around, and that impacts the bottom of Division III because now the worst player in Division III in years past now doesn't have college opportunities, and it forces people to have to be more realistic about where they stand because the opportunities are less than what they used to be.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's another reason why the game is so talented, right, at every level, right? And you're seeing the transition to the professional level, right? More and more guys who are at, the top of the sport get to the major league level, right, and advance through minor league systems, at a, year and a half, 2 year rate because of how talented the sport is. And that's just because there's more dudes, right, that are making up these rosters, right, because of, the way that the draft has proceeded post-COVID. So it's had a huge effect. I think, obviously NIL kind of ties in with that too, you know what I mean, with signability, at the top of the draft, right? You have high school prospects, who, maybe, in rounds 5 through 10, they're getting money that equates to a signing bonus, right? Given the slot value of some of those picks, from a collective, right? And hey, let's go and have a great experience in some of these awesome college towns with great baseball environments. And, I'm getting, no longer just, 50% scholarship. I got a chance to make six figures, significant six figures over the course of 3 years. And then, head into the draft in a stronger financial position. So I think, those two things, multiplied, have definitely increased the talent pool, and you're seeing guys head to campus, I think, at a higher rate than ever before, which, again, creates that domino effect and definitely increases the talent pool throughout all different levels.
Mm-hmm. I always say, and you mentioned that high school kids are getting to college because of NIL. I also think developmentally, and this is probably more of a draft conversation or player development conversation, but developmentally, you could argue you're better off in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or Chapel Hill, North Carolina than you are in, Charleston, West Virginia in the bus league, right? Because not only you get fed better, you're not riding a bus for 12 plus hours just to play a game. You're not playing every day. Off-season strength and conditioning is all covered. Clothing, like I always tell everybody, it's like, when you're in the ACC, one of my good friends who's in professional baseball who played in the ACC, he goes, you don't fly private in pro ball. Like, until you get to the big leagues, you don't fly private. You fly private in the ACC. When you go down to Coral Gables, you fly private. And those are all things that I think people have started to realize as well for the top high school guys, for the Jack Lighters of the world, the guys that end up making it to campus that are kind of not expected to, and even in probably the early 2010s would have never sniffed a college campus because, why would you walk away from set amount of money to, go to a college? Well, Vanderbilt and what Coach Brown has done there and Coach Corbin have done there, it's like, well, you can go to Vanderbilt and increase your draft stock because the situation is going to be better, because you're going to be well taken care of, because the amenities that college programs are able to offer these kids is so much better. But the NIL side of things, right? This doesn't affect everybody. Division II, Division III guys, lower level Division I guys, sorry, you're not getting paid, right? No offense. You might, if you're able to strike yourself something and maybe build a social media following, you may, but the top of the top, right? It's one of the things that if guys go to, a American Athletic Conference school and have a great freshman year, well, the vultures start circling, and they want to strike because those are programs that are invested in winning. And it has changed the dynamic of just recruiting in general, but also just the avenue that it is in college baseball. So how has NIL in this space, we've already talked about the draft and transfer portal and the talent and how everybody's more talented. Now we factor in NIL and pay for play and actually being able to be compensated for your skill set that is as a baseball player. How has that continued to change the recruiting process in college baseball today?
Yeah, I think it's definitely widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots, at the Division I level. I don't think it's a coincidence that 4 ACC and 4 SEC teams ended up in Omaha, and I don't think it'll be the last time we see that. You have programs operating with multi-million-dollar collective NIL funds versus, others that just don't have that procurement of funds to be able to fund a roster, and I think it has definitely made things more transient, on top of the portal. And, I think that the one thing that probably, when you look at it from a a standpoint of the pure finances too, is like, we're not a full scholarship sport, right? So, when you start to talk about, families that come from a situation where the athletic scholarship is of a paramount to the decision making, right? The chance to go and leave school with little to no debt, or certainly make a significant amount of money becomes, definitely a force in terms of their decision making, right? And um, again, I think when you look at this whole conversation, it really has become year to year, right? And speaking to a lot of college coaches, right, they've stopped using the word program. Like, we no longer have a program; we have a team, right? And we're going to think about it year to year and how we construct our roster, and putting the best 35 to 40 players we can in our room, and figuring it out here across this season. And then, we're probably going to have to hit, the reset button at the end of the year, and see who's staying and see who's going on, and how NIL is either bringing in talent or pulling talent away. And then, try and reconstruct it here on the fly, and some combination of portal and high school recruiting, and see what, we can do to compete in the next season. And that's just the reality of the sport, really across, all levels, because, again, yes, NIL's at the top of the sport, but that pulling of talent away from high-end mid-major programs creates a ripple effect. And at the end of, the August period, right, as guys head to campus, there's a lot of new faces in that locker room. And, I think coaches are faced with a lot of challenges in that front, in terms of culture setting, and just, trying to fit a lot of pieces in, very quickly across a fall season, because, it goes quick. You get to campus, you get through some indies, you get your fall period, they go home for Thanksgiving, and you show up, and it's kind of time to go, so how you, really try and escalate that process of getting everybody to buy in is really difficult, and I think ultimately, I think that's probably one of the biggest frustrations, for coaches, when you talk with them about just the effect of this, in terms of how it, the impact on their locker room and their roster.
It's hard to build a culture with new pieces each and every, spring, or sometimes semester, right? But let's say each and every spring and fall, when you start the year, you at least feel like you have something set in stone. But when it's not constant, and I think I can speak for all college coaches, is you think you've gotten to know these people through the recruiting process. You think a couple phone calls, you think a campus visit, you think all of these contact points that you have is going to paint a picture of how they're going to be in the locker room. And then they get on campus and you see their true colors. And sometimes you were right, and sometimes you made a good evaluation on the person, but that's not always the case. I think more and more coaches get burned by personalities in the transfer portal than they too get burned by talents. In high school, we get burned by talents a lot. We don't usually as much get burned by personalities. But in this space where there is no continuity, and it is, like you said, I like the way that that was presented, was it's not a program anymore. It's a team. It's each and every spring we have, our 2025 team, and then we're going to have our 2026 team, and it's going to look different. And being able to understand that is creating a better image of what college baseball is today. And this episode, for the conversation we have had, is very doom and gloom. If you're listening to this right now, you're like, man, college baseball is in a bad way. I'm never going to be recruited because I'm not the guy that's fitting into those classes at 5. So what's your message when somebody may start feeling bleak, and how the transfer portal, because that's a question I get. It's, when's this transfer portal going to clean up? When are these COVID years going to clean up? When is this going to clean up? And when is it going to start to benefit my kid or my situation? Because we want to get the opportunities too. How do you go about having that conversation and maybe spinning it positively?
Yeah, well, I said this. It's here to stay.
Yeah.
This is the reality of college athletics, right? Obviously, we're talking about it from the scope of our sport of baseball, but you're seeing the same things in football and basketball. Really all the NCAA. Um, I think if you prioritize fit, right, good players are always going to find a home, right, at the end of
Mm-hmm.
the day. And if you prioritize fit, place where you can excel on the field, in the classroom as a person, there's still a lot of great opportunity out there for you. And yes, I know a lot of guys have, big aspirations, but getting to a place where you can be successful in those key areas, um, think about it through that scope. At the end of the day, when you look back on your college career, whether you're at Arcadia or Carolina, right? And I'm sure Alex could, mention this. He's got some unbelievable relationships and experiences at Arcadia, right? He's just so
Mm-hmm.
happened to now have a chance to go play in Omaha, and that's obviously great too. But that doesn't um, devalue anything that took place at Arcadia, right? Because at the end of this whole thing, when you're 10 years down the road, you're left with your degree, the experiences, and the relationships. And if you ultimately get a chance to play, those are going to be the result of that, those 4 years on campus. And whether that happens, at the Division 1, 2, or 3 levels, they're not any more meaningful, right? And I think if you take that perspective to it, there's great opportunities out there. I've been fortunate to be around guys who have been to the Division 3 World Series. I've won a Division 3 national championship. Like those guys, their memories and the way they talk about, those games is unbelievable, right? Like they have an opportunity and memories that are at the highest level of this sport, and if you get a chance to accomplish that, trust me, you're going to think very fondly, right, of those games and those moments. So really prioritize that, right, and go to a place where you're going to have those opportunities. And look, the reality of the sport is if you're excelling and you're exceeding your current level of play, there's going to be chances for you to continue to push the envelope once you're already on campus. But I think, while there's definitely a more competitive environment within the recruiting process, good players are still going to find homes. There's so many good programs out there and coaching staffs at all different levels. Do your research. Take the time to go and watch college baseball. Um, you know, Obviously it's more accessible than ever, but get in the car, go watch the ODAC, go watch, the NJAC, the PSAC, um, Centennial Conference. Like there's really good baseball across the entire, East Coast from every level that they're, is being played. And if you're willing to, again, prioritize fit, there's a home for you.
What was the old NCAA slogan? It was like 95% of college athletes go something professional other than sports or their sport or something of that nature. I think that's was what the NCAA was probably trying to say. And especially as we've gotten to this point in time in this age where it doesn't feel like college athletics, as I said to enter this episode, it's not your grandfather's college athletics where everybody played for the logo on the front, and wanted that pride that came with wearing your school colors. I think there's still a lot of pride that comes with those things, but there's also outside factors that come into play a little bit more frequently. But at the end of the day, if you're somebody who's interested in playing college baseball, like you said, it's about the experiences, it's about the relationships, it's about the degree, and all of those things play huge dividends because at some point, whether you play 20 years in the MLB or whether you play 0 at bats in college baseball, like there's going to come a day where you're going to have to hang up your cleats, and the only thing you're going to have at that point in time is your degree, your relationships, and your memories. And They come at all levels. Trust me, when you're having fun and you're enjoying your time playing every day at a Division III school and things like that, you're not going to be like, well, it would be so much better if I was no, you're going to love the people you're around. You're going to love the experiences, and you're going to love everything that comes from it. And just always remember that there's a lot of good opportunities out there in college baseball that aren't just the big ones, the 4 SEC and 4 ACC programs that played in Omaha this June, because those are great programs. Nothing wrong with those programs at all. But there's also thousands of other programs that have great opportunities as well. So, Sam, any closing thoughts before we let our listeners get out of here?
No, I think the one thing I'll leave everybody with is prioritize fit. Do your research as a recruit. If you're afforded the opportunity to take visits, don't sell any program short. Do your due diligence, find a place where you can excel across those key areas. And at the end of the day, if you make the right decision, you'll be in a great place for your future, whether that's start to finish or a place where, you eventually do get a chance to move on and, take advantage of the portal, NIL, and those things that, are part of our game.
Those things are the byproduct of being the hardest worker in the room. And always remember that. You do. There's certain things you can control, and there's certain things you can't control. Working your tail off and getting 1% better 365 days a year is something in your control. If those things are the byproduct of doing the necessary things each and every day, you'll be very excited to be there. And that'll be the well-deserving return of the hard work you've put in. But until you're willing to commit those things, like getting better each and every day and spending the necessary time to do that, don't even bother thinking about those other things, because that's just outside noise, and that's going to distract you from being the most successful you can be in the scenario that you're ultimately in. And I think that's definitely the best message that we could leave this episode on, is making sure that there is optimism out there in this landscape of college baseball. Doesn't mean it's not messy, but there's optimism out there, because there's a lot of really good opportunities for anybody who wants to work their tail off and play and have a successful college baseball career. But thank you to our listeners for tuning in, as that will conclude this episode of The Trail. Make sure to smash the subscribe button. Follow us on all social channels. Share with 5 friends. If you thought you took something out of this episode, check out our catalog on the Backside Groundballs Media YouTube channel. It has all the basic questions that we get in the recruiting process. So some things that may be pertinent to you, like making a skills video, email campaigns, reaching out to college coaches, choosing the right showcase program, all the important questions that we feel like you should have answered through the recruiting process. Check it out on the Backside Groundballs media page. And until next time, we'll see you on the next episode of The Trail.